Hi, everybody. So I actually have a pretty big pleasure today of introducing someone who I get to mention on just about every jumpstart that I do with professional services here at Jamf, and that's Rich Troughton, the master of FileVault. He is the lead Macintosh help desk technician at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and so just a round of applause for Rich.
Thanks. All right, well, with an introduction like that, I am Rich Troughton. And before we get started, there's two things I'd like to mention. The first is that all the slides, speakers, notes, and the demos are going to be available for download, and I'll be providing a link at the end of the talk. I tend to be one of those folks that can't keep up with the speaker and take notes at the same time. So for those folks in the same situation, no need to take notes. In addition to the recording that Jamf is making, everything I'm going to be covering is going to be available for download. The second is that my talk is likely going to take the full hour, so that won't leave time for Q&A. Instead, please bring your questions to the Securing Macs panel, which is being held in the other theater directly after this one. And with luck, I'll be able to answer most of your questions during the talk itself. So one of the changes that Apple introduced with Lion is that its FileVault encryption solution has been completely revamped, changing it from encryption that primarily protected your account's home folder to encryption that protects your whole boot volume. Now, despite the common name, the two solutions are very different beasts. Now, if you've used the older FileVault, be aware that everything you know about it has changed in Lion and later. And since Apple's dubbed the new encryption as FileVault 2, I'm going to be referring to the older FileVault as FileVault 1 during this talk. So FileVault 1 had some upsides and downsides. The biggest upsides were that it used strong encryption, it was low cost, and it was designed for ease of use. The biggest downsides were that it was difficult to back up the encrypted home folder. There were problems with using FileVault 1 with network accounts, and FileVault 1 was not able to provide whole disk encryption. So Apple had known about its customers' problems with FileVault 1 as it was designed, and they went back to the drawing board to provide a full disk encryption solution. And ultimately, this effort would require the complete rebuild of FileVault from the ground up, basing the new FileVault 2 on an entirely new type of virtual volume storage, which Apple named Core Storage. While you can make unencrypted core storage volumes, which is how Apple's making the new Fusion drives, its most common use in Lion and later is to provide FileVault's encrypted volume storage. Core storage works on a per partition basis, which means that you can have both encrypted and unencrypted partitions on the same physical hard drive. FileVault 2, in broad terms, we're talking the 10,000-foot view, works like PGP or other full disk encryption solutions available for the Mac. When you start up your system, a small unencrypted partition provides the needed tools to unlock the much larger encrypted storage, usually through what's called a pre-boot login screen. If you provide the right authentication to the pre-boot login, the encrypted storage then unlocks, and the OS then takes over and boots your Mac. Once the Mac is unlocked and booted, the user doesn't have the issues with backups and network accounts that FileVault 1 users had because, from the OS's perspective, everything it needs to access is in fact accessible. Now, because not everything about FileVault 2 is obvious at first glance, I want to make sure to cover one of the lesser-known relationships in 10.7 and later, and that's the relationship between Recovery HD and FileVault 2. So what does Recovery HD have to do with FileVault 2? Well, FileVault 2 encrypts your boot partition, but your Mac still needs an unencrypted space to boot to and allow access to the unlock tools. The recovery partition serves as that needed unencrypted space. The FileVault encryption process will check before beginning the encryption to see if the recovery partition is there, and it won't begin the encryption if it's not there. So let's take a look at what it looks like to turn on FileVault 2 on your own machine. In this case, there's no enterprise management. You just got it. You pulled it out of the box. You want to encrypt your machine. So first of all, we're going to log in as my Troughton account. And the first place we're going to go into is System Preferences. OK. Next, we're going to go up to Security and Privacy. And select FileVault. OK. And if you notice, turn on FileVault's grayed out, so we're going to go click that lock. And something cool happens when you put in your password here, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So we're going to put in our password, hit unlock. Button's no longer grayed out. Let's go ahead and turn on FileVault. OK. So next, we're going to enable our existing users by clicking Enable User and then entering the account's password and clicking OK. However, if you notice, there's already one account that's checked off as enabled. How'd that happen? Well, how that happens is actually pretty neat. When you click the lock to unlock the FileVault preferences, FileVault 2 caches your authentication credentials And then when you click Turn on FileVault, those same credentials got kind of passed around the back to silently in the background to enable your account. In fact, Apple took this functionality and extended it in a couple of ways. The first was that if the administrator account you're enabling is the only account on the machine, you aren't prompted to enable any users. It just is smart enough to say, OK, I'm just going to move on. The second was that if an existing admin account needs to be enabled, it can become an authorized account via the same authorization handoff. The new account would need to log in at the regular login window, open the FileVault preferences, click the lock, and then click on the Enable Users button that will appear at the bottom of the window. So apparently past me was getting ahead of me. So he's now gone ahead and enabled the other account by selecting it and enabling it. So what's appearing on the screen now is this alphanumeric string, and this is going to be your recovery key. This is your back door in the event that everything goes wrong and you need to unlock and recover your encrypted storage. Apple calls this the individual recovery key, and it's very important that you make a note of this when it appears, because this is going to be the only time it appears. However, Apple recognized it was very important that this not get lost, so they offer you the option of storing it with them. So let's take a look at what happens when you store the recovery key with Apple. So when you choose that option, what you're going to get are these 3 security questions which you can choose from. And you'll select the questions, and it's very important that you remember the exact answers you're putting in. And the reason for that is that when you call AppleCare and say, I need my recovery key back, they're going to ask you these questions, and they're going to need the exact answers because your recovery key is also encoded on Apple's end. That is Apple's way of making sure that ultimately only you can govern who has access to your recovery key. They don't even have access to it without your say-so. Those are good answers, man. So you know what? It's a demo. I'm going to risk it. Let's not store the recovery key with Apple. And in that case, hopefully I remember the recovery key. So let's go ahead and click Continue. And basically, at this point, we just need to restart to begin the encryption process. Encryption actually isn't kicking off at this point. What is happening is that all the bookkeeping is being done to kick off encryption, but it hasn't actually started yet, and I'll tell you when it does. So we're rebooting. Here we are at that pre-boot login screen, so both my enabled accounts are showing up. I'm going to go ahead and select my Rich Trouton account. All right, I'm going to put in my account password. And this is when encryption's actually kicking off. That's a fail-safe to help make sure that if something goes wrong between the reboot and getting to the pre-boot login screen, you're not locked out of the machine with no way to get in. And through the magic of the movies and making the encryption go much faster, not real-world speed, folks, because otherwise you'd have to leave for a bit. So, pretty simple. The nice thing about this is that the encryption, once you tell the encryption to kick off, it'll keep going. You put the machine to sleep, wake it back up. Encryption will pick back up where it left off. You restart it, it'll pick back up. You shut it down, you restart it again, it'll pick back up. I've even seen it pick back up without a problem after a horrendous crash. So it's pretty robust, and in general, this is the kind of thing where you can start it, hand it off to your users, they can keep working while the encryption finishes. Now, the chief use of the FileVault 2 individual recovery key is to help you reset your account password in the event that you forget what your password is. To use the recovery key at the pre-boot login screen, you would enter your password incorrectly 3 times. And after that, the login screen should prompt you for the recovery key, like it's doing right now. So an important thing to note here is that this functionality was built to reset the password of a local account. If you have a network account where your password is being managed by a directory service like Active Directory or Open Directory, resetting your password using this method will likely break the password sync between your account on the Mac and the directory service. And in that event, you'll likely need to delete and reset up the account on the Mac in order to fix this. This is one of those little trade-offs in life. Would you rather break your account or get access to your data? I'm a fairly savvy IT guy. I'll always choose I want my data, and I'll fix the rest later. So you put in the recovery key, and the next place it's going to take you to is the regular login window. You'll stop there, and you'll be prompted to reset your password. So let's go ahead, reset our password to a new one. Verify it. I'm going to skip the password hint. I'm a smart guy. I remember all this stuff. Don't we all? Reset password. And after that, FileVault 2 will be updated with your new password. Everything will be fine. And at this point, you're just passed on to your desktop. Now, for those of you who want to roll out a managed deployment of FileVault 2, deploying and supporting FileVault 2 in a larger Mac environment is almost exactly the same as setting up for an individual. Apple recognized that it would be an administrative headache to track multiple individual recovery keys. So the sole difference between managed and unmanaged is how the recovery key is generated. And that recovery key system is the one part of FileVault 1 that has survived in FileVault 2. And that sole survivor is FileVault master.keychain. What does FileVault master.keychain do? Well, it serves as essentially setback door. In the event that you weren't able to get into an encrypted Mac using the usual passwords, you could use FileVault master.keychain to unlock the encryption and recover the data stored inside. Now, in the FileVault context, Apple historically called this a master password. This master password is, in fact, the password to a FileVault-specific keychain. So when you're setting the master password, what role is that password actually playing? It's the password used to secure the FileVault master keychain itself. Because this password is only used to unlock the keychain, this password can be rotated without affecting the contents of that keychain, much like how changing your account's password doesn't affect the contents of your login keychain. Wait, that sounds crazy. If all the master password is doing is unlocking a keychain, how is it doing recovery? Well, FileVault master.keychain is a FileVault-specific keychain, whose only contents are an SSL certificate, which I'm going to be referring to in this talk as the public key, and an accompanying private key. These two keys are specifically used for FileVault certificate-based authentication. Now, when both are available, you can use them to unlock or decrypt FileVault 2's encryption without knowing any of the passwords of the accounts on the machine. Now, for those who are experienced with a managed FileVault 1 deployment, setting a FileVault 2 recovery key with FileVault master.keychain is exactly the same as setting it with FileVault 1. In fact, for those following Apple's recommended best practice, you don't need to change anything. Now, I know we're getting on a little bit away from FileVault 1, but I'd just like to see a show of hands. How many people had to deal with a FileVault 1 deployment? Show of hands. OK. How many people followed Apple's recommended best practice? OK, nobody. How many people had no idea there was Apple recommended best practice? Yep. OK. The reason I recommended Apple's recommended best practice is that Apple has always recommended escrowing the FileVault private key somewhere outside the encrypted Mac. However, in FileVault 1, you could have both the private and public keys stored in FileVault master.keychain, and it worked fine. In FileVault 2, this recommendation is now a requirement. If FileVault 2 detects both the private and public keys in FileVault master.keychain, it makes the assumption that this is a leftover from an older OS, say you upgraded from Snow Leopard. And in this case, it'll default to setting up an individual recovery key. So if you already had a FileVault master keychain, and you put it on a machine, and you go to turn on FileVault 2, and it gives you the alphanumeric string and asks you to save it with Apple, double check that keychain. Now, if you do not already have a pre-built FileVault master keychain, you'll need to create one and add it to your machines before encrypting them. Build your keychain by setting the master password on a particular machine and copying the FileVault master keychain file off of it. And at this point, the keychain will contain both the private and public keys needed for FileVault recovery. Now, once you have your keychain, make several copies and store them in a safe place. Now, everybody's got a different conception of safe, but I like safes, metal walls, combination lock on the front, or put it on an encrypted disk image that is itself stored somewhere secure, like a file share that very few people have access to. Make sure you protect this thing. In 10.7.2 and later, you can actually use a security command to create a FileVault master keychain from the command line. And this method will create a 2048-bit private key by default. So once you've got your copy safely stowed, edit yet another copy of your keychain and remove the private key to prepare it for use as your FileVault 2 recovery key. So let's take a look at how that works. So once again, I'm going to log in as the Archrouten account. And this time, our first stop is not going to be system preferences. We are going to go into terminal. And the first command I'm going to run is actually security help, because I want to show you where this command is. So way down there at the bottom, you've got create FileVault master keychain. And description is pretty short and sweet. Create a keychain containing a key bearer for FileVault recovery use. So I'm also copying and pasting that, because that's a lot to type. So I'm going to go ahead and run sudo security create FileVault master keychain, and I'm going to be putting in the correct location, which is library keychains, and I'm going to be naming it FileVault master.keychain. All right, that's all good. Hit return. First password here is for sudo. Next password is going to be the master password that your institution has agreed upon to use. Then you retype it, and generates a key. Now, it says this may take several minutes. I've never had it take more than a few seconds. So let's go see where that got created. So, where did I put that? Macintosh HD, the library, no, library. Thank you. All right, so keychains. And there we go, FileVault master.keychain. And Passme is about to do something very smart. He is sticking that in a safe place. He's already made a copy off on the key recovery drive, which I'm going to designate as safe. So next thing we want to do, now that we have a copy safely stowed, we're going to go ahead and edit the keychain that's on this machine. So we're going to go ahead and run security, unlock keychain, library keychains, FileVault master keychain. All right? We put in the password that we just set on it, so that's that master password your institution is using. If all goes well, you just go to the next prompt. Everything looks good. So let's go into keychain access. And there is our unlocked FileVault master keychain. So we've got our private key in there, got our public key in there. If you notice, this certificate is actually expired. That actually turns out not to matter at all. When you generate this, it'll set an expiration date of 1 year from creation. Doesn't matter at all. You can keep using this certificate for years to come. So let's go ahead and delete out our private key to prepare it. All right. Hit that delete. Mac's going, are you sure? Yes, I want to modify the keychain, so let's get that out of there. All right. Private key is now removed, so we should be good to go. Let's get out of keychain access, and let's lock that keychain back up. So we're going to run security lock keychain, and do library keychains, FileVault master keychain. And you don't need a password to lock it up. Never need anything to lock the door. So let's go ahead, go into System Preferences, go back into Security and Privacy, click that lock, turn on FileVault. It's doing that round the back pass to enable my account. So yep, it's already checked off. Let's go ahead and enable our other user, our local admin. All looks good. Huh, that's different. Okay. Well, instead of getting the alphanumeric string, since you're setting the recovery key instead of the machine setting it, you're going to get this. A recovery key has been set by your company, school, or institution. That's language that should be broad enough to cover just about any place where you'd be doing enterprise management. So instead of getting the chance to store it with Apple, we're just being told, let's go ahead and restart. So let's go ahead and do that. Keep in mind, encryption's not actually kicking off at this point. What it's doing is the bookkeeping. Okay, here's our 2 accounts. Looks very familiar, just like last time. Putting in my password. There we go. Once again, through the magic of the movies, I'm going to make this go much faster. Because you guys' time is valuable, and you don't want to watch this for 20 minutes. So, all right, encryption's finished. FileVault's turned on. Huh, that's different. Previously, for those who had been watching it before, it said a recovery key has been set, period. Now it's saying a recovery key has been set by your company, school, or institution. This is a little visual cue that Apple built in to tell you whether or not you're using the individual recovery key or if you're using only the institutional recovery key. So if you're using only the institutional recovery key, you will see this. If you are using the individual key, you will see a recovery key has been set, period. So just a quick little visual cue that you can tell. Okay, so once you have your FileVault master keychain ready, you can take that keychain and deploy it to as many machines as needed. Disaster recovery. This is something you should always plan for when dealing with encrypted machines. After all, these are designed to protect your data against external threats unless proper authentication is provided. If your OS takes a dive, your normal way of providing authentication may no longer work. Now, the first thing you should generally try is the password to one of the authorized accounts. And this applies to all FileVault 2 encrypted Macs, regardless of the kind of recovery key being used. Now, if you have the password to an authorized account, unlocking or even turning off the encryption is pretty straightforward. You would boot to Recovery HD or another boot drive running 10.7 or later. You'd open Disk Utility and either select Unlock or Turn Off Encryption. You'll be prompted for the password of an authorized user. You provide it, and you're golden. You can also recover from the terminal, but you'll need a few more pieces of information. The first is to get the logical volume UUID of the drive you want to work on. And you can do this by running dyskutil core storage list. And you can also substitute CS in place of core storage in commands like this. So once you have the UUID, you can then use it to specifically the drives that you want to either unlock or decrypt. And in this slide, I've highlighted what you should be looking for when checking for the UUID. Hopefully, everybody can see this. But once again, all the slides are going to be available for download, so you should be able to take a look for yourself. Now, you can either unlock or decrypt using the password of an authorized user using the command shown on the screen. You can also unlock or decrypt using the individual recovery key using the command shown. And with the institutional recovery key, it's a two-step process. First, you'll need to retrieve your keychain from that safe place that you put it in. And second, you'll need to unlock that keychain so that the Mac has access to both keys. So once you've unlocked the keychain with both the private and public keys inside, you'll run the command shown to either unlock or decrypt the disk. Now, since FileVault 2 now has access to both keys, you shouldn't need to provide any other passwords. OK, so let's take a look at how that works with the institutional recovery key. So first thing, we're booted from Recovery HD. That's small. Let's make that a little bigger. Yeah, hopefully everyone in the back can see that. OK. So first thing we want to do is, first of all, let's check to make sure we can see that keychain. So I'm going to CD to volumes key recovery and make sure I can see, there it is, FileVault master.keychain. Awesome. So next thing I want to do is run dyskutil core storage list, because I want to get that logical volume UUID, which is right there, which I'm going to copy and then paste later, because that is a pain to retype. All right, so got the logical volume UUID. Next thing I want to do is unlock the keychain. So I'm going to run security, unlock keychain, and provide the path, which in this case is going to be volumes key recovery, FileVault master keychain. So far, so good. Let's put in our password for that. All right, unlocked just fine. And now after all that, let's go ahead and actually run our unlock command. So we're going to run dyskutil core storage, unlock volume, because we just want to unlock. We don't want to decrypt in this case. Put in my logical volume UUID. I'm telling dyskutil core storage that I'm going to be using a recovery keychain. And next, I'm going to be providing the path to that recovery keychain. All right, and return. Boom, you're unlocked. So let's just double check. Let's make sure everything's looking OK. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of terminal. And next, I'm going into disk utility. Let's take a look. And there we go. Macintosh HD is showing up as a unlocked but still encrypted drive. And at this point, if you wanted to, you could run disk utility. You could start recovering data. You could do whatever you needed to do. Now, starting in 10.8.4, Apple changed dyskutil, so it now requires an administrator password before you can decrypt a FileVault 2 encrypted boot drive while booted from it. Now, here's what happens when a standard user tries to decrypt. So, maybe you got a user who's like, I'm kept down by the man, and I've Googled for this, and I found this guy, their Flounders blog, and he told me how to do this. So he's running dyskutil cs revert, put in logical volume UUID. He's putting in stdin passphrase, so it'll prompt him for his password. All right, return. Authentication required. I got that. I don't got that. Shucks. So this is what happens with a standard user now. Prior to 10.8.4, if they'd put in their passphrase, decryption would have started. So something to keep in mind. But here's what happens with an admin user. So they put in their passphrase. They get prompted for their administrator rights. Of course, they have them. And at that point, it starts decrypting. So for those of you with standard users who want to keep them from decrypting their machines, I highly advise you upgrade to 10.8.4 or later. For those on Lion, monitor. That's the best advice I have at this time. Apple did a good job of keeping bad guys out. They didn't, up until 10.8.4, put a lot of effort into keeping authorized users in. So there were some side effects to this change. The most notable was that you can no longer just decrypt a machine while booted from Recovery HD. If you try, you will get this confusing error, this lovely confusing error. The given UUID is not a core storage logical volume UUID. Yes, it is. You can see it right there. That is not the most helpful error message Apple has ever put out, and I actually did not find the answer to this in Mountain Lion. I found this in 10.9 DP1. I cannot go into the details of what I found, but since the answer also applies to Mountain Lion, I will give you the answer. And the answer is that Apple now requires that the encrypted volume be unlocked first. Once it's unlocked, then you can decrypt. So that drove me crazy for a little bit until like I said, I went to WWDC, got DP1, and I was like, oh. And then I filed a bug. Always file bugs and stuff like that. So, yeah. So with the exception of that last bit about decryption, everything I've talked about up to this point has applied equally to Lion and later versions of OS X. Now, before we dive into fdesetup on Mountain Lion and later, let's take a look at what FileVault 2 and 10.7 does not have. You can monitor, unlock, or decrypt a FileVault 2 encrypted boot drive using command line tools, but you can't start the encryption process from the command line, at least using Apple's native tools. Instead, the encryption needs to be enabled from System Preferences FileVault Preference pane. It is not possible to see who has FileVault 2 enabled accounts without looking at the pre-boot login screen. It can be difficult to add an account to the list of enabled accounts without using the FileVault Preference pane. It's not possible to remove an account from the list of enabled accounts without either deleting the account or setting the account password to be blank. And you have to choose between using the individual alphanumeric recovery key or using the institutional recovery key using FileVault master.keychain. fdesetup allows FileVault 2 administration from the command line, and it solves every single one of those problems with its various functions. It will turn on FileVault 2 encryption using a variety of options. It'll disable encryption. It'll allow addition and removal of FileVault 2 enabled users from the command line. It'll supply a current list of authorized users, provide encryption status, and much more. So fdesetup has a number of verbs associated with it. The ones that may be most commonly used are enable, disable, add, list, remove, and sync. fdesetup is amazingly flexible when it comes to enabling FileVault 2 encryption from the command line. Now, to start with the simplest method, you would run the command as shown on the screen to enable FileVault 2 encryption. Next, you'll be prompted for the username and password of the primary user, which is the account that you want to have appear at the FileVault 2 pre-boot login screen once the encryption is turned on. Now, if everything's working properly, you'll next be given an alphanumeric individual recovery key and prompted to restart. Now, one thing that's very important to know is that the individual recovery key is not saved anywhere. You don't get the option to store it with Apple here. You will need to make a record of it when it's shown, or you will not have it later, period. You can also enable additional user accounts at the time of encryption, as long as the accounts are either local or mobile network accounts. You would run the command as shown on the screen and specify the accounts you want. And as part of this, you'll be prompted for the account's passwords. You can't add an account without also knowing the account's password. Well, there is an exception to that rule, and I'll cover that later. After that, you'll be given an individual recovery key and prompted to restart. All the accounts specified should appear at the FileVault 2 pre-boot login screen. Now, for those who want to automate the process, because yay, automation, fdesetup also supports importing a property list file via standard input. The plist file needs to follow the format shown up on the screen, and more users can be added by appending their information under the additional user's plist key. Now, once the plist has been set up, you would run the command shown on the screen to enable FileVault 2 encryption and then reference the information in that plist file. Now, since the accounts and passwords are in the plist file, fdesetup will not need to prompt you for passwords. Instead, the individual recovery key is displayed, and the user is prompted to restart. All the accounts specified in the plist file should then appear at the FileVault 2 pre-boot login screen. Now, to avoid the need to enter a password, fdesetup also has a defer flag, which can be used with the enable verb to delay enabling FileVault 2 until after the user logs out. Now, with the defer flag, the user will be prompted for their password at the next logout. The recovery key information is not generated until the user password is obtained, so the defer option will require a file location where this information will be written to as a plist file. The plist file itself will be created as a root-only readable file, and it will contain information similar to what's shown up on the screen. Now, for security reasons, this plist should not stay on the encrypted system. It should be copied to a safe location and then securely deleted from the system. Now, if you have a particular user account you want to enable, you would run the command shown on the screen to defer enabling FileVault 2 and specify the account that you want. Now, if you don't want to specify the account, you would run the command shown on the screen. If there is no account specified, then the currently logged in user will be enabled for FileVault 2. If there is no user specified, and nobody's logged in at the time that the command is run, then the next person who logs in will be chosen and enabled. On logout, the user will be prompted to enter their account password. Once entered, FileVault 2 will be enabled, and the recovery information will be written to that plist file. Once the enabling process is complete, the Mac will restart. Now, an important thing to keep in mind about the defer option is that it enables one single user account at the time of turning on FileVault 2 encryption. So you get one user, one time. The defer option does not enable multiple user accounts, and it cannot be used to enable accounts once FileVault 2 encryption has been turned on. Now, another capability of FileVault 2 and Mountain Lion is the ability to use the alphanumeric individual recovery key, an institutional recovery key using FileVault master.keychain, or both kinds of recovery key at the same time. Now, as seen in the earlier examples, fdesetup will provide the individual recovery key by default. To use the institutional recovery key, the keychain flag needs to be used as shown on the screen. The individual recovery key is displayed, but the encryption will also use the FileVault master.keychain institutional recovery key. Now, in case recovery is needed, either recovery key will work to either unlock or decrypt the encrypted drive. Now, if you want to specify that only the FileVault master keychain be used, both the keychain and no recovery key flags need to be used when enabling encryption. Now, I will say this is not one of my favorite phrasings here, no recovery key. It actually means just no individual recovery key. In this case, it's going to use the institutional recovery key instead. If you actually try to set up FileVault 2 in Lion or Mountain Lion without a recovery key, fdesetup will yell at you. fdesetup is also capable of creating a FileVault master keychain and automatically storing it in library keychains. Now, to do this, an existing FileVault 2 public key needs to be available as a DER encoded certificate file. Now, once that's available, the command shown on the screen will enable FileVault 2, automatically create the institutional recovery key with the supplied certificate file, and store it as library keychains, FileVault master.keychain. So let's take a look at how you would create a DER encoded certificate file from an existing public key. Now, in this case, we're assuming that there's not a pre-existing recovery key, so we'll be creating one with the create FileVault master keychain tool. So, got terminal open. Let's go ahead and run sudo security, create FileVault master keychain. And we are going to put that into library keychains. FileVault, we can call it FileVault master.keychain. All right, putting in our first password for sudo. Next password is going to be the master password that our institution has agreed upon. Retyping it to verify it, generating it. All right, looks good. So let's go ahead and exit out of terminal. OK, so our next stop is keychain access. And FileVault master keychain is locked up. But you know what? That doesn't matter, because keychains protect secrets, and a public key is not a secret. You could post a public key on a bulletin board, and it doesn't matter. So we're going to save that as filevault.cer. File format is certificate.cer. Save it on the desktop, and now we have a properly DER encoded certificate file. That easy. And we're going to come back to filevault.cer in just a few minutes. Now, to specify that only the FileVault master keychain be used as the recovery key, you would add the no recovery key flag to that command. Now, along with the various options for enabling, it's also possible to force a restart of the Mac once FileVault 2 has been successfully configured. Now, this can help automate the process of enabling FileVault 2 on a Mac if no input from a logged-in user is needed. For example, an organization may want to pre-configure its Macs so that they automatically encrypt with FileVault 2 at first boot with a local admin account enabled. I'm sure nobody has that scenario here. It also wants to use only the institutional recovery key. If a plist with the desired account information and a certificate file to create the institutional recovery key is available, the command shown on the screen could be used to enable FileVault 2 and then force a restart at first boot. So since this combines 3 different enable options, let's take a look at how it works when you run that command to automatically encrypt. Now in this case, I'm going to be enabling 3 accounts via a plist file and setting the institutional key as the sole recovery key. So let's go ahead and run sudo fdesetup enable. We're going to tell it that we're going to be using a plist. So input plist, feeding it in with path to fdesetup.plist. We're going to tell it that we're using a certificate. And we're going to next feed it the path to that certificate. FileVault.cer, that's that one we just created. So we got no recovery key, that badly phrased thing, and then force restart. And be sure you're ready to go when you put in the password here for sudo, because it will do its bookkeeping, and then it's restarting. It's very quick. So it's setting up our 3 accounts, finishing up its bookkeeping in the background, and boom. And here's our 3 accounts. Administrator, Rich Troughton, Troughton, Rich. Troughton, Rich is actually an AD account, so you can enable AD or OD accounts this way. Login is my local Rich Troughton account. Encryption's kicking off in the background. I got this Ghost of Christmas Past terminal session. Let's get out of that. All right, quit now terminal. And next place we're going to go is into system preferences, because let's see how this turned out. Okay, so let's go up to security and privacy. Once again, magic of the movies, making it go much faster. So FileVault is turned on, encryption's finished. A recovery key has been set by your company, school, or institution, so that tells us we're using only the institutional recovery key. There's no enable users button down at the bottom, so that tells me all the accounts on the Mac have been enabled, and it's turned on, and it all happened automatically. Isn't that beautiful? So, in contrast to all the various options available for enabling FileVault 2 using fdesetup, the command to turn off FileVault 2 encryption is fdesetup disable. There's no additional flags associated with this command. It's an off switch. Now, once the Mac has been fully encrypted with FileVault 2, you can add additional users using fdesetup. Now, to do so, you'll need to provide both the username and password of either a previously enabled account or an admin account, as well as the password of the account you want to add. Now, there's something interesting to know about this method. The admin user in question does not themselves need to be enabled for FileVault 2. In my testing, I found that an admin user can authorize the enabling of other accounts, even if that admin account wasn't itself enabled. An admin account can also enable itself using this process by being both the authorizing account and the account being enabled. This is similar to the system preferences behavior, where an admin account could enable itself by logging in and then clicking on the lock in the FileVault preference pane. Now, since a key has to be involved somewhere, I've got an inquiry open with Apple as to why this works, but I haven't heard back yet. The command shown on the screen will enable a specified user on this encrypted Mac. And the primary user can be any account on the Mac that's already been enabled for use with FileVault 2, or any account with admin privileges. Now, for those who want to automate the process, fdesetup also supports importing a plist file via standard input. And the plist file needs to follow the format shown up on the screen. When adding additional users using a plist file, the top-level username key is ignored, and the password key value should be an admin account's password. Now, more users can be added as needed by appending their information under the additional user's plist key. Now, once the plist has been set up, you can run the command shown on the screen to add additional users by referencing the account information in the plist file. To list all accounts enabled for FileVault 2, fdesetup includes the list verb. Now, to get a list of all FileVault 2 enabled accounts on your Mac, you would run the command shown on the screen. All enabled accounts will be listed with both the account's username and their UUID. To remove accounts from the list of FileVault 2 enabled accounts, fdesetup includes the remove verb, and you can remove your users by using either their username or their UUID. Now, I'm not sure when you're going to run into a situation where you're going to have the account's UUID, but not have their username, but it is nice to know that you do have both options. Now, to remove the account by username, you would run the command shown on the screen and provide the account's username. Similarly, to remove by UUID, you would run the command shown on the screen and then provide the account's UUID where appropriate. Now, fdesetup also includes the sync verb, which allows FileVault 2 to check with the Mac's directory service and see which accounts have been changed. Its main use currently is to automate the disabling of FileVault 2 enabled accounts by checking with the directory service to see which accounts have been removed. That's actually a key there, removed. It doesn't know anything about how you went into AD and checked the disable checkbox. All it sees is whether or not the account is there. If an account has been removed from the directory service, running fdesetup sync on an encrypted Mac will automatically remove the account from the list of FileVault 2 enabled accounts. Now, the sync will only affect the account's FileVault 2 status. It doesn't remove it from system preferences, and it doesn't take out the account's home folder. It just means that it doesn't show up at the previewed login screen anymore. Now, one important thing to know is that sync does not allow accounts to be automatically added, only removed. So, fdesetup is a Swiss Army knife for managing FileVault 2 on Mountain Lion and later. It can enable FileVault 2, it can add and remove users, it can report on FileVault 2 status, and more. If you're managing FileVault 2 encryption in your own environment, I really recommend using this tool. Properly used, it will save you time, and it will give you encryption options available with no other software. And that gives me a good segue into how the Casper Suite is managing FileVault 2. So, in Casper 8.6 and higher, there's a disk encryption configurations available in the management settings. However, if you don't have rights to manage disk encryption, you won't see this option. In order to access it and other disk encryption settings, some access rights need to be granted to your account on the Casper server. Now, it's important to know that these rights are not granted automatically to existing admin accounts. You will need to go in and grant those rights. Now, if you haven't previously set up a disk encryption configuration, there won't be any existing setups found. To get started on creating one, you would click on the New button. Now, in the Casper Suite, Jamf software opted to rely solely on fdesetup for its FileVault 2 management. That's why they don't really offer it for Lion. They'll offer some support, but really started in Mountain Lion. All Casper disk encryption configuration options use fdesetup's capabilities. Now, to illustrate, let's take some of the options available and translate them into their fdesetup equivalents. As I mentioned earlier, management of recovery keys is really important when it comes to FileVault 2 encrypted Macs, as they are your disaster recovery method. When the Mac has been encrypted using a Casper policy, Casper can provide back the recovery key if needed. So the three recovery key options available are the individual key, which is that alphanumeric key that FileVault 2 generates if there is not a FileVault master keychain on the Mac. There's the institutional key, which is a FileVault master keychain file. And there's the individual and institutional key, which is fdesetup's new way of using both the alphanumeric key and a FileVault master keychain together on one machine. Now, with this option, you can have two recovery key options available on one encrypted Mac. Now, the individual recovery key will be generated and sent up to the Casper server without additional work needed on the Casper admin's part. If you're using the institutional key will need to be generated and then uploaded to the Casper server. So let's take a look at how that works. So I'm going to go ahead, log in as R. Troughton. All right, and the first place we're going to go to, we're going to assume that we don't already have an institutional key. So let's go ahead and create one. So we're going to go ahead and run sudo. Thank you. Sudo security. Create FileVault master keychain. Bear with past me, he's typing a little slow today. And we're going to put in the proper location, which is library, keychains, and give it the proper name of FileVault master.keychain. Okay. Put in our first password for sudo. Next, we're putting in the master password that our institution has agreed upon. We're We're going to verify it. And should be good to go. So we're going to exit next out of terminal. And then we're going to go into keychain access, where we have our unlocked, because remember, when we first created it, we had to lock it back up. When you create it, it'll show up as unlocked. So here's our private key, here's our public key. And let's go ahead and select them both, because we need to export them out. We're going to go up to File, Export, and we're going to save them as a P12 file. So we're going to call it Casper FileVault 2 full recovery key. Should always be descriptive when you name these kinds of things. All right, we're saving it as a P12 file to the desktop. And because we're saving it as a P12 file, you will need to put in a password to export it. And it's very important you remember this password. Anytime you interact with this file, anytime, you will be asked for this password. So if you lose it, you're sunk. Keep track of it. All right, so there's our P12 file. However, not all institutions want to have their complete recovery keys stored up on their Casper server. Maybe they want to put it in that nice metal safe. So Casper also has the option of just using the public key, because all you need to encrypt is the public key. You can have your recovery key stored somewhere else. So we're going to go ahead and save that as Casper FileVault 2 public key. We're saving that as a DER encoded certificate file. And we're good to go with those two. So the next thing we're going to do is go to our JSS. Going to go ahead and log in. You know, I just noticed that it spell checked the login screen. That's interesting. Apparently Casper admin is spelled wrong. So next we're going to go to management settings. Over there we've got our disk encryptions configurations, which you will only see if you've given yourself the proper privileges. We don't have any setups, so let's go ahead and create one. Display, let's give it a descriptive name. So I'm going to call it FileVault with institutional key. I'm going to set that to cover key type of institutional. And I'm going to set the enabled FileVault 2 user to be current or next user. And what that'll do is that'll trigger fdesetup defer. So next, I need to upload my institutional key. So let's go find that. It's out on the desktop. Let's expand that out so we can see the names. So the first one I'm going to upload is that P12 file. Let's go ahead and hit choose. All right, let's hit upload. And it's asking for that password. And that's the exact same password that you set up when you exported that P12 file out of Keychain Access. Like I said, anytime you interact with that P12 file, you need to put in that password. So let's go ahead and hit save. All right, so it looks like we're good. So let's go ahead and hit done. So that's the one with our complete recovery key. So it's got its public and private. But let's set up the other one that has just our public key inside. Let's go ahead. Oh, what happened there? Oh, wait, there's my mouse. Something went wrong there. Maybe I hit a button accidentally. My bad. OK, so here's where I actually wanted to be. My apologies for the interruption. OK, so we are putting in our public key. So we're going to name it FileVault with institutional public key. We're going to call that institutional. So this is basically just like it was before. The only change we're really making here is that we're going to be uploading that DER encoded certificate file for the public key. So let's go ahead and select that. Hit choose. Upload. And since this is the public key, it doesn't need any special protection. You're never going to be asked for a password for this. So looks like we're good. Let's go ahead and hit done. All right, looks good to go. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. OK, so next thing we need to do, now that we've got it up there, how do we get it back down? And in this case, we're only going to be concerned with getting the institutional key that has both our private and public keys back down from the server. Because if you just have the public key, you can't do decryption with that. So the only thing we're going to be concerned here is downloading our institutional that complete recovery key pair. So going back into the JSS. Going to Computers, Management Settings, going to Disk Encryption Configurations, and we're going to select FileVault with institutional key. And if you notice, there's a download button, so let's go ahead and hit that. And what that downloads is a P12 file, which it's, Casper's just renamed it the recoverykey.p12, but it's the same P12 that you had, but the same password. So let's go ahead and get out of there. So now that we have the P12 file, let's use that to build a recovery keychain. So we're going to go ahead and, on this machine, there isn't a FileVault master keychain. So let's go ahead and create a new keychain. Call this one FileVault master, just because I like to keep the names consistent. Save it to the desktop. Here, you can pretty much set whatever password you use. This keychain is going to be pretty disposable. The idea is that you use it once, and then you toss it. Because after all, you can always get your recovery key pair back from the Casper server. So keep in mind, this shouldn't stick around forever. But at the same time, you can set it with whatever password you use. You don't have to necessarily use your master password. So let's go into Downloads, select our P12 file. Our destination keychain is FileVault master. That's exactly what we want. Here we're getting prompted for the password for that P12 file. That's exactly the same password that you used to export it out in the first place. So like I said, anytime you interact with this thing, you'll get asked for the password. We're being asked here if we want to trust the public key because this was a self-signed key that got created on another machine. So you have to choose to trust it before you'll be able to use it. So there we go. We've got our public and private key. We should be ready to go to use this keychain for FileVault recovery on another machine. All right, so let's quit out keychain access. And very important, clean up. This is the kind of thing you don't want to have sitting around on a machine if you can possibly avoid it. So let's go ahead and empty the trash. And we've got our FileVault master keychain. And once you're done using that, get rid of that too. Keep in mind, you can always download a fresh copy if needed. OK. Once a Mac has been encrypted using a disk encryption policy, authorized accounts will be able to access the recovery key from that Mac's inventory listing. To access the recovery key, go to the Management tab and then click on the Get FileVault 2 Recovery Key button. Now once clicked, the button disappears and reveals the recovery key information. Now in this case, the Mac in question is using both the individual key and the institutional recovery key together. Clicking the download link will give you that P12 file you would need to build a complete recovery keychain. Now, one way to encrypt your Macs is to do it with self-service policies. And here's an example of how you may want to set one up. You'll want to give it a descriptive name and set the trigger option so that it's triggered by self-service. Execution frequency should be either set to once per computer or ongoing. And I've got mine here set to ongoing in the event that you want to allow for decryption and then re-encryption. Here I'm setting the disk encryption configuration that I want to use. Here, in this case, I'm specifying that the recovery key should be the alphanumeric individual recovery key type. And to make sure that the JSS knows about the changes, I'm specifying that the Jamf binary on the machine send an updated inventory back to my JSS. Here I'm setting the self-service options, nice icon, policies, everything else. And here I'm requesting that the user log out because I'm planning to do a deferred enable, which requires the user to log out and then supply their account's password. In the chosen disk encryption configuration, since it's specifying that the current or next user will be enabled and that the individual recovery key is being used, the Casper agent will be running the fdesetup command shown on the screen. So let's take a look at how this looks from the user's end. So I'm going to go ahead, log in as my Artrouton account. OK, my machine's not encrypted. I've been told I should probably encrypt it, so I'm going to go into self-service. As you can see, I'm not a heavy user of self-service here. I just have this one policy, encrypt Macs, encrypt this Mac with FileVault 2, short and sweet. What it's doing in the background is it's doing the bookkeeping. It's running fdesetup defer. It's also running that recon. And when it's finished, which may take a minute or two. Do, 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 do. OK, so here's my message. Log out at the next opportunity to start FileVault encryption. I always do what I'm told. So I'm going to quit out of self-service. And next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and log out. All right, so here we're being prompted for our password as part of the deferred enable. So I'm going to put in my password and hit restart. It's going to go through, do the bookkeeping to get everything set up to enable FileVault 2 encryption. It's restarting. Since this is the only account that's enabled on the machine, it doesn't give you the selectors. You just select your account and gives you the password blank. Putting in my password, encryption's kicking off. OK, I'm logged back in. And hopefully not seen in this scenario, a call to the help desk. Hopefully your user was just able to handle this all on their own. So let's take that same policy and change the disk encryption configuration, have it specify that the Casper management account be used. Now with the user change, the Casper agent will be running the fdesetup command shown on the screen. I'll also be changing the displayed message so that it requests a restart instead of a logout. Now you can also force that restart, but I like to ask people nicely. So login is our Trouton. All right, let's go back into self-service. Apparently haven't added any more policies since the last time. All right, so let's just go in and encrypt max. And once again, this is going through, though it's running a slightly different fdesetup command. In this case, it's actually specifying a particular user. It's not going to do the defer. And in this case, it's specifying the Casper management account that the JSS knows about. So it's also running that recon to let the JSS know what's going on. And reboot at the next opportunity to start FileVault encryption. Like I said, you could force the restart at this point, but I like to be nicer than that. So let's quit out of self-service. And then let's go ahead and restart. And rebooting. Huh, that's not our Trouton. Who's that? All right. Somehow I know his password anyway. So in this case, this might be a scenario where an IT shop wants to handle the encryption before they hand it off to the user. Go into self-service, have it specify the Casper management account. And as you can see, this is a different account. It's got different background and everything else. OK. FileVault 2 is an overall better solution than FileVault 1 is, but it doesn't necessarily cover all workplaces' requirements for full disk encryption. Among the things you cannot currently do with FileVault 2 are the following. You cannot use remote management tools at the pre-boot login screen. All current remote management tools require the operating system to be running. The operating system is not running at the pre-boot login screen, so there's no way to run those tools. You cannot use authentication methods other than passwords or passphrases. At this time, the EFI boot environment does not support the use of encryption tokens, such as like smart cards or USB encryption dongles, to unlock FileVault 2's encryption. And you cannot set the FileVault 2 pre-boot login screen to display username and password blanks. It only allows for the account icons. Now, this is probably one of the more common questions I get. I'm pretty sure it's one of the more common questions that Apple gets. Why can't I have username and password blanks? So I went to WWDC and I asked them. And they said, it's impossible. Not, it's hard, not, we're working on it, not, this again. Well, they may have said that quietly in the background. But they said impossible. Now, I will say I am rotten at predicting the future. But as of Lion and Mountain Lion, it is impossible. Now, for folks who want to use FileVault 2 in a government or other heavily regulated environment, FileVault 2 on 10.8 is certified as being FIPS 140-2 compliant by the US government's FIPS 140-2 encryption standard. Show of hands, how many people are happy about that? Anybody happy about that? One person. Anybody else? I'm happy about it. 2 people. All right. At any rate, it's a good thing because it means that the US government can now use FileVault 2 in their environment without getting a bunch of waivers. Apple is working on FIPS 140-2 certification for Maverick's Common Cryptography Foundation, which would also cover FileVault 2 on 10.9, but the certification process can only be begun once Mavericks has been released. So that particular clock will start whenever Apple releases Mavericks. Now, at this point, there is no plan to certify Lion's Common Crypto, so Lion's FileVault 2 will not be FIPS validated within the foreseeable future. Now, if you want more information, I recommend checking out the following issues of MacTech. The 2012 issues should be available via the MacTech iPad app, and print copies of all issues should be available for ordering if you go to the MacTech website. For additional information, I've also talked about FileVault 2 at other conferences, and the video links for these talks are available here. That includes, last year I spoke on this topic at JNUC. If you want to know basically what it looked like in Casper 8 to do this, go to that talk last year. I covered a lot of that. And because you can never have too much information, useful links, more useful links, even more useful links, more useful links, more useful links. Possibly the most useful link in this presentation. Here is how you download this presentation. PDF is available with the speaker's notes from the top link, and keynote slides, including all the movies, all the demos, all my speaker's notes, everything. Bottom link. And with that, I'm going to leave that up on the screen. How are we doing on time? We are right at time. Wow. I apologize that I don't have time for Q&A during this session. However, the Securing Macs panel directly after this session, I will be there. Other security-minded folks will be there. If you have FileVault 2 questions, please bring them there. I love questions. Ask away. But thank you very much. And thank you for sticking around this late in the conference.